You know that neighbor who acts like they were personally assigned by the universe to police everyone else's life? Yeah, that's Karen. She's the kind of person who walks around with a clipboard she doesn't actually need just to make herself feel important. Karen lives 3 houses down from me, and ever since I moved into this neighborhood 2 years ago, she's made it her full-time mission to micromanage the street. At first, I thought she was just overly enthusiastic about community involvement. She'd show up uninvited with suggestions about paint colors, lawn edging, or how often one should power wash their driveway. The kicker? Her house wasn't exactly a model of perfection. Her grass was usually patchy, her flower beds overrun with weeds, and her Christmas lights, when she actually put them up, were about as festive as a DMV waiting room. But I kept it cordial. I'd smile and nod and pretend I appreciated her advice, even though she was basically telling me to turn my home into a clone of hers. It wasn't worth the drama. Most of the neighbors seemed to have a similar approach: polite distance, mild tolerance. You ignore the barking dog if it's behind a fence, right? Then came December. The holidays are kind of my thing. I grew up in a family where decorating was an event, like hot chocolate, Christmas music blasting, climbing ladders, arguing over light placement, and then standing back proudly to admire the finished masterpiece. So when I bought my first house, I vowed to carry on that tradition. This year, I really pulled out all the stops. It started with the lights, hundreds of twinkling LEDs in classic white wrapped around the trees, roofline, and porch rails. Then, I added a projection light that made it look like snow was falling on the front of my house, even though we live in a state where winter never actually arrives. I bought an 8-foot inflatable snowman, a candy cane pathway, and even built a life-size wooden sleigh and painted it by hand, complete with reindeer and glittering reins. It was festive, warm, cheerful, something that made you smile when you passed by. And the reaction from most of the neighborhood? Pure joy. People walking their dogs slowed down to admire it. A couple of kids from the next street over brought their parents just to see the Christmas house. My elderly neighbor across the street told me it reminded her of the way things used to be. But Karen was not having it. I first noticed her standing at the edge of her driveway one evening, arms crossed, jaw tight, just staring. I gave her a friendly wave. She didn't wave back. The next morning, I found a note taped to my mailbox. No envelope, no signature, but the handwriting looked suspiciously judgmental. It read, "Your decorations are excessive and distracting. Please consider the aesthetic harmony of our neighborhood." I laughed out loud, honestly. Aesthetic harmony? We live in a cookie-cutter suburban development with beige siding and vinyl shutters. No one here is winning any design awards. I threw the note in the recycling bin and went about my day. Then came the passive-aggressive commentary. I overheard her telling another neighbor that some people think Christmas is an excuse to turn their home into a circus. She never said my name, but the pointed look in my direction made it crystal clear who she meant. I ignored it, figuring, if she didn't like it, she could just look the other way. But ignoring Karen is like ignoring a raccoon in your attic. Eventually, it gets loud. A few days later, during a sunny Saturday when everyone seemed to be outside hanging decorations or raking leaves, Karen made her move. She marched right up to my yard, heels clicking against the sidewalk like punctuation marks in her fury. "I assume this is your doing?" she asked, waving a hand at the sleigh. "Yep," I said, keeping it cheerful. "Pretty cool, right? Took me all week." Karen didn't even look at it. "It's gaudy, it's too much. And frankly, it's embarrassing for the rest of us. People are starting to call this street Tacky Lane because of your little light show." I wanted to laugh again, but something in her tone stopped me. She wasn't just annoyed. She was genuinely outraged, like my holiday spirit was a personal attack on her sense of order. "Karen," I said as kindly as I could manage, "it's just decorations. They'll be down by New Year's. No harm done." No harm, she snapped. I had to explain to my sister, who was visiting by the way, that our neighborhood doesn't usually look like Las Vegas. You're drawing attention to yourself in a way that makes the rest of us look bad. This is a community, not a theme park. At that point, I realized something. Karen didn't dislike my decorations because they were too bright or too big. She hated them because people liked them, because they made me stand out. And in her mind, if she wasn't in charge of something, it had no place in the neighborhood. I'm sorry your sister didn't appreciate the sleigh, I said. But I'm keeping it up. If the HOA has a problem, they know where to find me. That was the moment her eyes narrowed. Oh, they will, she said. Trust me. And with that, she turned on her heel and stormed off, heels clicking in, a way that now sounded more like a warning. I stood there in the soft glow of the lights, watching her retreat, and felt a strange mix of annoyance and amusement. I knew she was going to make a big deal out of this. I just didn't know how far she'd go, or how badly it would backfire. The HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday, and I knew, just knew, Karen would show up with an agenda longer than a CVS receipt. I'd seen her storm off after our little front yard exchange, and if there's one thing Karen loves more than unsolicited advice, it's a chance to speak at length in a room where no one can technically interrupt her. I considered skipping the meeting altogether. They're usually a snooze fest filled with debates over mulch guidelines and whether we need a new sign for the dog park, but something told me this one would be different, and I was right. I walked into the clubhouse about 10 minutes early. A few familiar faces were already seated in the usual plastic folding chairs, sipping lukewarm coffee and chatting about the weather. Most of them nodded or waved when I came in. Carol, who lived on the corner, gave me a thumbs up and whispered, "Love your display." I smiled, feeling a little more grounded. Then she arrived. Karen came in like a storm front, sharp blazer, hair sprayed into place, expression tight as a drum. And she wasn't empty-handed. No, Karen was carrying a manila folder so thick it looked like it contained classified government documents. She clutched it like a weapon. The meeting started with the usual housekeeping, a financial report from Bob the treasurer, a quick note from the landscaping committee, and an announcement about upcoming gutter cleanings. I sat quietly, trying to stay calm. Then right on cue, Karen raised her hand. "Yes, Karen," said Linda, our HOA president, already sounding exhausted. Karen stood. "I have some concerns I'd like to share regarding one of our neighbors and their extreme holiday display." She said it like she was about to report a crime. Linda sighed. "Karen, this really isn't, I promise." "This will be brief," Karen said, opening her folder. Spoiler, it was not brief. She began passing out printed photographs of my house, taken from multiple angles no less. One was a close-up of the inflatable snowman. Another showed the projection lights casting snowfall onto my garage door. A third had my handmade sleigh in full glory. She slid them across the folding tables like she was presenting evidence at a trial. "This is what our neighborhood has become," she declared. "This is the result of unchecked individualism, gaudy displays that detract from the cohesion and class of our community." I felt the heat rising in my chest but said nothing. Yet a few people shifted in their chairs. No one said a word. Karen continued, clearly enjoying the silence. "We have guidelines, people. They exist to protect our neighborhood's image. But this..." She held up a photo like it was Exhibit A in a murder case. "This is what you'd expect to see in a roadside attraction, not in a peaceful residential area." Then she said the thing that snapped the last thread of my patience. "I propose that we establish a limit on the size, number, and type of holiday decorations allowed. And I further suggest that violations be met with fines." That was it. I stood up. "Karen," I said, "with all due respect, are you really comparing a festive yard display to some kind of crime scene?" She turned toward me, chin up like she was about to bless me with a lecture. "I'm pointing out that when someone's decorating affects the rest of us, it's no longer personal expression, it's a public nuisance." I raised an eyebrow. So now lights and a snowman are a nuisance? Did I miss the part where joy became offensive? A few people chuckled. Karen bristled. This isn't about joy, she snapped. It's about taste, standards, respect for your neighbors. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. What you call tacky, others have called beautiful. I've had families stop by just to admire the lights. Kids leave notes in my mailbox. One neighbor told me it reminded her of how her street used to look when she was young. I didn't do it for a contest or attention. I did it because I love the holidays, and I thought it might bring some happiness to people. If you don't like it, you're free to look in another direction. But demanding rules and fines because something doesn't fit your idea of taste? That's not respect, Karen. That's control. The room got quiet. Not tense, thoughtful. Bob, the treasurer, cleared his throat. I have to say my grandkids loved it. They begged to drive by every night. I haven't seen them that excited about anything in a while. Carol spoke up next. Honestly, Karen, we've all lived here long enough to know what's truly disruptive, and this isn't it. We have bigger issues than twinkle lights and inflatable reindeer. Karen looked around, stunned that her performance wasn't winning hearts and minds. You could almost see the gears turning in her head as she realized the room wasn't behind her. Then Linda, the HOA president, said something that sealed it. Karen, she said slowly, you're welcome to share your opinion. But when you start attacking your neighbors and suggesting punitive measures over decorations that have brought people joy, especially during the holidays, it crosses a line. We have bylaws to enforce real problems, not to police someone's idea of festive spirit. Karen opened her mouth, probably to defend herself, but Linda wasn't done. And frankly, the tone of your complaints has become increasingly aggressive. This isn't the first time someone has come to me saying they felt personally targeted by you at these meetings. Going forward, I'm instituting a simple rule. Anyone who cannot speak respectfully, who uses these meetings as a platform for personal attacks, will be asked not to attend. Karen froze. Are you saying I'm banned? I'm saying you're welcome back when you're ready to contribute constructively. Until then, yes, I'm asking you to refrain from attending future meetings. The silence that followed was heavy. One of those rare moments where everyone's trying not to react too visibly, but you can feel the shift. Karen stood there, blinking rapidly, as though she'd just been hit by a snowball she didn't see coming. She grabbed her folder and walked out without another word. No dramatic speech, no slamming of doors, just stiff posture and retreat. And as the door swung shut behind her, someone in the back whispered, "Merry Christmas to us." And the room broke into quiet, relieved laughter. Me? I sat down and took a deep breath. My hands were still trembling, a bit from the adrenaline. But I knew right then that something had changed, not just with Karen, but with the entire neighborhood. People had chosen kindness over control, community over complaint. And Karen? Well, she had chosen silence. After Karen stormed out of the HOA meeting, the room was eerily quiet for a moment, like everyone was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. But when that didn't happen, people started shifting in their seats again, relaxing, exhaling the tension they'd been holding in. You could feel the collective relief settle into the room like a heavy coat being shrugged off. Linda, our HOA president, did her best to get the meeting back on track, but honestly, everyone's mind was still on what had just happened. It's not every day that the neighborhood's most notorious busybody gets publicly called out and essentially suspended from community involvement. And the best part? She did it to herself. No one forced her to act like the holiday police. No one told her to gather printed evidence like she was presenting to a jury. She thought she'd shame me into submission, and instead, she got banned. By the time the meeting wrapped up, a few people came over to shake my hand or pat me on the back. "Good for you," one man said. "About time someone stood up to her." Another woman whispered, "We've all been dealing with her for years. Thank you for saying what we were all thinking. And it wasn't like I'd given some kind of rousing speech or anything. I'd just defended my right to decorate my home with joy. Apparently, that was more radical than I realized. The next morning, I woke up expecting things to feel the same, but they didn't. For the first time in a while, there was no tension in the air. No anxious peeking through the blinds to see if Karen was marching up the sidewalk with another complaint. I actually sat on my front porch with a mug of coffee and just enjoyed the view. And that's when I noticed something strange. Across the street, the elderly couple who usually kept to themselves, Mr. and Mrs. Dobbins, had put up a string of lights. Just a single strand along their porch railing, but still. I hadn't seen them decorate in the 2 years I'd lived there. Then, a few houses down, the Martins had added a blow-up Santa next to their bushes. By the weekend, it seemed like half the street had suddenly found their holiday spirit. At first, I thought maybe it was just coincidence, but then people started making comments when they passed by. "We were inspired by your display," Carol said as she walked her dog one morning. "It reminded us why this season used to feel so special." "You made it okay to go all out again," another neighbor told me. "We used to do this every year, but somewhere along the line we stopped, probably because we didn't want to deal with the criticism." And I got it. Completely. Karen hadn't just complained about decorations. She'd subtly bullied people into suppressing their joy, their creativity, their sense of community. Over time, they'd retreated into neutrality, just to avoid conflict. But now something had shifted. A door had opened and people were walking through it with strings of lights and inflatable candy canes in hand. My house was still the most decorated on the street, but now it didn't feel like it was standing alone. It felt like part of something bigger. At night, when all the lights were glowing, our block didn't just look festive. It looked united, like we'd all silently agreed to make the season brighter together. One afternoon, as I was tightening one of the wires holding the sleigh in place, a little boy walked up with his mom. He couldn't have been older than 6. He looked up at the display with wide eyes and whispered, "It's like magic." His mom smiled at me. "He asks to come see it every day after school. We just wanted to say thank you." I bent down to the boy's level and said, "Well, I made it for kids like you." He gave me a big, toothy grin and then handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing, crayon on construction paper. In it, he'd drawn my house, the snowman, the sleigh, and even the falling snow lights. At the bottom, he'd written, "Best house ever." I almost teared up on the spot. Word of what had happened at the HOA meeting continued to spread too. Apparently, Karen's dramatic exit had become the neighborhood's favorite story to retell, each version more embellished than the last. One person swore she'd slammed her folder on the table before leaving. Another claimed she tried to call Linda a dictator under her breath. None of it was true, of course, but I wasn't about to correct anyone. Let the myth grow. Karen, for her part, went completely silent. Her porch lights stayed off. Her blinds were perpetually drawn. The lawn decorations she'd sometimes put out, usually just a modest wreath or a sad string of flickering white lights, never appeared. It was as if she'd vanished, or maybe she was just licking her wounds in solitude. Either way, no one missed her presence. Instead, something else blossomed, something a little unexpected. The community started interacting more. Neighbors who barely knew each other began chatting in the street, comparing lights, sharing hot cocoa, even organizing a last-minute block party. Someone set up a folding table with cookies and cider in their driveway. Someone else brought a Bluetooth speaker and started playing Christmas music. Kids played tag between front yards while parents laughed and sipped from thermoses that may or may not have contained spiked eggnog. It was the kind of scene that, frankly, I didn't think happened anymore outside of Hallmark movies. But there we were, living it, and it all seemed to stem from one simple act: choosing joy over judgment. I started noticing other changes, too. A neighbor I'd never really spoken to before, Sam, who lived at the end of the street, approached me one night while walking his dog. "Hey," he said, "I've always wanted to do one of those light shows synced to music, but I never had the guts. Think you could show me how?" "Absolutely," I said, grinning. The next weekend, we were out there together, setting up controllers and running wires. By the end of it, his house had a modest light show to rival mine. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was effort, and it was fun, and it was exactly what this neighborhood needed. Karen had tried to use the HOA to tear something down, but instead she built something without meaning to. A reason for people to reconnect, to share, to celebrate. And though no one said it outright, there was a shared understanding among us now. We weren't just standing up to Karen. We were standing up for each other, for community, for kindness, for a little bit of sparkle in a world that can often feel far too dull. Sometimes it takes one person trying to dim the light to remind everyone else how important it is to shine. The night of the block party arrived with a kind of quiet magic. That's hard to describe. One of those evenings where the air feels crisp, but not too cold, where lights reflect softly off windows, and laughter floats between houses like snowflakes. The decorations that now lined the street turned everything into a festive wonderland. There were twinkling icicles, handmade signs that said, "Merry and Bright," and even a few DIY reindeer sets that looked like they'd been painted by enthusiastic but slightly chaotic children. It wasn't perfect, but that's what made it beautiful. It was real. The entire block buzzed with energy. Someone had set up a long row of folding tables covered in plaid tablecloths, and people brought crockpots, homemade cookies, and trays of fudge and tamales. A neighbor named Greg, who apparently used to DJ in college, brought speakers and started playing a holiday playlist that bounced between Frank Sinatra, Mariah Carey, and some surprisingly catchy indie remixes. Kids zipped past with red cheeks and mittens, chasing each other between blow-up Santas and lighted archways. I even saw one little girl try to feed a cookie to the inflatable snowman in my yard. I didn't stop her. Honestly, the snowman had seen worse. Neighbors I'd barely exchanged more than a wave with before were suddenly treating me like an old friend. Conversations flowed easily, people sharing stories about how they used to decorate when they were younger, or how they'd stopped because someone made them feel like it wasn't worth the trouble. No one mentioned Karen by name, but she was the ghost at the feast. Her absence was felt like a hole in the wallpaper. You didn't look at it, but you knew it was there. A few people asked me quietly if I'd heard anything from her. I hadn't. She hadn't been seen since the meeting. Some joked she'd gone into hibernation, like a bear offended by tinsel. Others guessed she was watching from behind her blinds, fuming with a mug of decaf and a list of future grievances. But honestly, I didn't care. For the first time since moving here, I didn't feel like I had to look over my shoulder. Later in the evening, someone passed me a cup of hot cider and said, "You know this party only happened because of you, right?" I laughed. "I think it happened despite me." "No," they said, serious now. "You pushed back when no one else would. You reminded us that we can choose joy, that we don't have to be afraid of a little color or cheer just because one person doesn't like it." That hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't thought of myself as brave. I just didn't want to be bullied into taking down something that brought people happiness. But maybe that's all bravery is. Choosing not to fold, even when it's easier to stay quiet. As the party went on, a spontaneous group of carolers formed. They started off with jingle bells and stumbled hilariously through Silent Night when someone forgot the words. We all laughed, clapped, and joined, in when we could. And then, in a moment that felt straight out of a movie, snow began to fall. Not real snow, of course. This is a warm state. But someone had rented a snow machine, and soon the sidewalk was dotted with soft, foamy flakes. The kids screamed with delight, running through it like it was the first snowfall of their lives. The adults smiled at each other, surprised, amused, a little emotional. That's when I noticed an older woman I hadn't seen before, standing at the edge of the street with a look of quiet wonder. She had a scarf wrapped around her shoulders and was holding a tray of what looked like lemon bars. I walked over and introduced myself. She smiled warmly and said, "I'm Margaret. I just moved in last month, right next to Karen's place." "Ah," asked her how she was settling in. She laughed gently. "Well, I was a little worried at first. I'd heard stories, but tonight, I think I landed on the right street." I thanked her and offered to take a lemon bar, which turned out to be delicious. We talked a bit longer, and then she said something I'll never forget. "You know, people think traditions are about doing the same thing every year. But really, they're about connection, about choosing to come together. What you all did here, this isn't just decorations or songs or cookies. This is community. That's rarer than snow in this part of the country." I don't know what it was. Maybe the faux snow drifting in the streetlights, or the way people had pulled together in the face of negativity. But her words settled in my heart like a warm coal. She was right. We hadn't just stood up to a petty complaint. We'd built something bright, something kind, something lasting. As the party began to wind down and people started packing up tables and hugging goodbye, I walked back to my yard and turned off the projector. The snowman gave one last jiggle in the breeze. The sleigh shimmered faintly under the remaining lights. I looked around at all the houses, some modest, some a little messy, all glowing in their own way, and felt a profound sense of peace. Just as I was heading inside, I noticed a light flick on at Karen's house. For a split second I wondered if she might appear at the window, scowl intact, arms crossed in judgment. But she didn't. Instead, her front porch light came on, and hanging from the hook beside the door was a wreath. A simple one. Green and red, nothing flashy. I stared at it for a moment, unsure what to feel. Maybe it was an olive branch. Maybe it was her own way of saying, "Fine, you win." Or maybe, just maybe, it meant she'd been watching after all, and something inside her shifted. Whatever the reason, I didn't need an apology. Not anymore. The wreath said enough. I went inside, turned on the fireplace video on my TV, poured myself a cup of cocoa, and sat by the window. Outside, the lights glowed. The snow machine sputtered its last few flakes, and the street, our street, rested. In warmth and color. Karen may have slammed my decorations, tried to silence the joy, and thrown a tantrum in a plastic chair. But in the end, she gave us a gift she never intended to give. She brought us together, and she'll be missing a lot. More than HOA meetings.